We get questions here at the Garden Basics podcast. Kathy writes in and says, I have a Better Boy tomato that after a lull over the summer started producing again. It's full of green tomatoes in various sizes. Since it looks like the temperatures are going to dip pretty low in the next few days, should I pick the larger ones and let them ripen inside? We would like to know. And this is one of these California problems, Debbie Flower, a retired horticultural professor. And this is something we Californians go through with every October, November, wondering if those green tomatoes out there are going to ripen before the first frost hits, or the second frost, or the third frost. What do you do? Do we just serve up fried green tomatoes, or do those tomatoes that are out there on the vine have a chance in late fall?
Well, first of all, I think it's also a problem for other places, because those tomatoes genetically are a perennial, and if the climate remained warm enough, they would ripen and continue to grow. And so wherever you are, no matter how early your frost comes, if you've got a tomato plant and it's producing fruit, you're going to be faced with this problem as well.
You're absolutely right in that this problem probably hits every tomato grower in America. Just some, it hits them earlier than others, sometimes in September, some in October, others in November or December.
Yes, right. My son lives in Minnesota. They've had snow already. So it's a moot point for them now, but it happened before, happened earlier in the year. So yes, we all go through this. And the tomatoes, I was looking at a friend's tomato plant the other day, and there were some really nice red ones all ready to be picked. And then there are the green ones. And yes, your question is, or the caller's question is, what will happen to those? It depends.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, it does depend. So I guess what one has to do is sort of like take a sample of the tomato and perform an autopsy on it.
Yes, the tomatoes ripen over time, and they start green, and then they progress to red or orange, or, depending on stripes, whatever color you have of tomato that you're growing. And so we need to check the maturity of that fruit. If it has matured far enough while it's still on the plant, then you can bring it in, put it on a windowsill, or even there are other you can wrap it in newspaper, place it. I did them in the basement of one of my houses in a fruit box on a bed, wrapped each one in newspaper. So you can bring them in and they will ripen if they've matured far enough on the plant. And so you have to, as you say, dissect them to find out if they've matured far enough.
So what are the signs you look for? I imagine you kind of slice it open the middle and then you take a look at what's going on the inside.
Right. So a fruit exists on a plant to produce seeds so that the plant can reproduce. And so that's where we're going to look. If the tomato is completely green and we cut it open, then we need to look at the seeds. The seeds on tomatoes, as they mature, develop a gel sort of pillowcase around them, a coating around them. And if the seeds have produced that coating and they sort of push away from the knife as you cut it, then the tomatoes are mature enough to ripen. If when you cut the tomato in half, if you cut right through the seeds or there is no gel coating around the seeds, then they are not ripe enough to continue ripening off the plant.
And I guess too, you look at and see if the seeds move or not as you're cutting through. I noticed that Texas A&M University has some advice that after you slice through the center of the tomato, examine the seed within the fruit. If the seeds are covered with a clear gel, which causes them to move away from the knife, right, then that fruit will eventually turn red and ripen. On the other hand, if the seeds are cut by the knife, then those fruits will never properly ripen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting aside, at least for me, is that if you wanted to save seeds from your tomatoes that you grew this year and see what you get from them next year, they're seeds, so they won't be exactly like the parent plant that you just took them from. But what you have to do to get those seeds, prepare those seeds to be able to plant them next year, is get that gel that's around the seeds to ferment off, to expose the seed from that gel. So that gel is a pretty important indicator of maturity of the plant.
And I guess this is something that you cannot put off doing. That is picking up the tomatoes for ripening inside the house, because if a frost does hit, you're shortening the life of those green tomatoes.
Yeah, there are some important temperatures to keep in mind. Fruit development on a tomato plant slows way down based on night temperatures, when night temperatures get in the 40s. So night temperatures in general are very, very important to plant development and maturity. And so if temperatures are going to drop into the 40s, so below 50, then the plant is unable to produce the pigments and the chemicals that allow that fruit to ripen. And so it'll just stall. It'll just stop. So yes, you got to watch those night temperatures and bring those fruit in before they drop too low.
And from what I understand, too, it's a good idea to don't rip the fruit off of the plant, but to leave a little bit of the stem, because if you rip the stem out of the fruit, that'll open them up to more decay.
Yes, true. We're taking a fruit that's been growing on a plant outdoors and been exposed to whatever's in the air. And if we make any holes in it, whether we're picking a tomato that has maybe a slug hole or some other kind of browsing hole in it, or we rip that stem out of the top, we've opened the fruit up to the fungus and particularly bacteria that are in the air around the fruit, and it's all downhill from there. You're just going to end up with a whole bunch of mush. So cut the fruit off, don't rip it off.
I guess if you're just going out there to pick the mature green tomatoes, I guess a couple of things to look at: the size of the tomato and any sort of coloration change that might be going on.
Yes, a mature green tomato kind of needs to be defined, right?
Yes.
They're well sized. So we tested whether it was time to pick them by cutting them. So obviously that one tomato is not going to continue to ripen. So now we're going to go out in the garden and look for ones probably of similar size. And we will look at color. If they were green, which all tomatoes are in the beginning, and they're going to become a red tomato, they'll go through a phase where they have turned sort of more white. If they're that color and they're good size, then they have the chance to become red and produce the flavor that we like so much.
And I guess if that tomato is completely green, maybe start looking for others that show some sort of color change.
Yeah, obviously there's going to be some that have gone from green to white, and then they're going to start to become red. And if they've become red and you bring them in and put them in a well-ventilated area, they don't need to be in the sun. As I said, I've done it in the basement. We didn't have windows in the basement, not that produced sun anyway. They will ripen without being in the sun, and you'll have great tomatoes.
What is the proper storage temperature for these mature green tomatoes?
Well, you certainly want something above 50 degrees and below 85. Probably around room temperature would be the best. I don't know about your house, but 65 to 75 degrees. You could probably go lower than that, 60 degrees to 75 degrees. You don't want it too high because then they're going to dry out. You don't want it too cold because then they won't ripen as quickly.
And once that tomato is fully ripe, what is the best storage for a tomato?
Tomatoes should not really be put in the refrigerator, because refrigerators run around 40 to 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will destroy some of the flavor molecules in the tomato. So you want it to be 45 to 50 degrees. In my world, that's a hard temperature to come by. If you've got some kind of maybe a wine refrigerator that you can control, or a special little produce refrigerator where you can raise the temperature a bit higher than what your normal refrigerator is, then you've got the ideal situation. Maybe a
root cellars.
Yes, if you have a root cellar, that might work. But in my house, I don't have any of those things, and so I just leave them on the counter, but not next to the stove, not next to the oven, not near a heat vent. I want them to have good airflow, so put them up on a rack and space them so that air can flow between them. Wrapping them in newspaper can also be used because it helps dissipate the moisture that these fruits are alive, that a live fruit is producing, and it will result in less rot.
I guess, too, then for the next couple of weeks or so, if they are maturing at room temperature, and probably take about 2 weeks for them to mature, is to check them every few days and find ones that may have gone bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully you get them before they go bad and get to use them, can them, freeze them, dehydrate them, whatever your process is.
And then if you store them right again, build that root cellar while you're waiting and put them in there and they'll last a few more weeks.
Right. Right.
Now, have you ever tried pulling up an entire tomato plant and hanging it upside down in your garage?
I have not. I think once in the past I took some branches and hung them in the garage. It would have been the basement when I had a basement. It just seems like such a messy job to pull up the whole plant and drag roots and dirt and all around inside anywhere of the house, the garage, the basement, wherever. So no, I have not done that.
For those who have tried it, they probably know that you need to avoid sunlight because the tomatoes will spoil and ripen unevenly. And again, that root cellar temperatures would be ideal for that in the 55, 65 range.
They would. And it wouldn't be a big problem to bring the dirt into the root cellar. So, yeah, I envy the root cellar people.
Now, one thing about storing tomatoes, and I think this is a good idea too, is to store them by color, to have several different cardboard boxes in which to place these tomatoes, and then basically put the ones of similar coloration together because they'll tend to ripen together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The ones that are redder to begin with are going to ripen first. The ones that are closer to that white-green color are going to be the last ones. And so you look at everything in between. So that would help you organize your harvest.
Now, here's the dirty little secret about doing this. You're not going to get summertime flavor out of that tomato.
No, you won't, but you'll get something that's a lot better than what you find at the grocery store.
There you go. That's our criteria on this program.
Yeah, that's the point, right?
Yes, exactly. So basically, if you do all that, you can extend the enjoyment of tomatoes and still keep having BLT sandwiches for a few more weeks or maybe a couple of months.
Right. Thanksgiving's coming. Maybe you can have it then.
Could be. Now, what about fried green tomatoes? I mean, that's just not the title of a movie, too. That's an actual delicacy in some parts of the country.
It is. And I've made that because I've had green tomatoes that I realized were never going to ripen. And they still have good flavor.
They taste like tomato despite all the milk and egg and flour?
It comes through. That little bit of acid. Yeah, it comes through. I like an acidic tomato, so I'm typically growing an acidic tomato.
Okay, and they are fried, correct?
Yes, they are fried.
All right, so there is that. Now, at the Farmer Fred Rant blog page, I have a post called Saving the Tomatoes of Late Fall. And in there, we have a recipe not only for fried green tomatoes, but for oven fried green tomatoes, which sort of takes the fat out of being fried, basically. By oven frying, you're just using water, flaxseed, cornmeal, quinoa, cornstarch, salt, pepper, and tomatoes. And basically, you might spray a baking sheet lightly with canola oil, but that's the extent of any oil you might use. So
wow,
check that out.
Know. Yeah, I didn't know that there was a way of doing it in the oven, and now it's cooled off, so I'm willing to use the oven.
Okay. Yes, it has cooled off quite a bit. Well, we learned something about extending the tomato harvest. So especially if you're in USDA Zone 9, head out to the yard real soon. Start looking for those green tomatoes that may be turning color, clipping them off, bringing them in, putting them in cardboard boxes, and perhaps enjoying them in a couple of weeks.
Yummy.
Debbie Flower, retired college horticultural professor, thanks for letting us harvest the last of the tomatoes.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thank you, Fred.